Welcome to the Spectrum Lounge podcast, where we discuss creators of color disrupting the game in TV, film, and pop culture. I am your host, Rebecca Theodore-Vachon, and on this episode, we speak with screenwriter Ihuoma Ofordire to discuss episode 8 of the HBO series Lovecraft Country. Take a listen. Hello, Ihuoma. Welcome to the Spectrum Lounge.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We had some tech difficulty, but thank you so much for being so patient while we figured it out. I
No
was like, it's the
worries.
Jingle Bobos. They're trying to curse this podcast, but I'm like, I'm gonna get it done, damn it. So I'm so happy you're on here. Episode 8 of Lovecraft Country will be airing this Sunday, episode 8, and the episode is titled Jigga Bobo. Now, here's the thing. Watching Lovecraft Country, I'm a huge fan of the show. We know from episode 3, there was a certain cameo where we were introduced to the character of Emmett Till. Although we didn't know it was Emmett Till. I mean, you had a lot of history aficionados who had figured it out first. In episode 3, they referred to him as Bobo, which was a nickname of Emmett Till. So we kind of knew from the minute I saw that, I was like, okay, I know how Misha works. I know how the writers in this room work. That is not a gratuitous cameo. So can you tell us, like, on your end in the writers room, sort of like this idea of bringing Emmett Till into a real life historical person into this fictionalized world of 1955? What were some of the discussions and as far as like the story arc of how you're going to bring that into Lovecraft Country?
I mean, it was a perfect alignment to a certain extent. It just so happens that our show was 1955, Chicago, and that's where Emmett was from. So we just thought it was a great opportunity to humanize him and to show who he was, prior to his murder. Typically when we think of Emmett Till, we think of his body, we think of his mom, we think of the outrage, we think of the murderers getting off scot-free, but we never really think about who he was as a kid, before this tragedy. So we wanted to honor him in that kind of way, in a way to humanize him, and when you see him as a real person and then this thing happens, I think it takes a totally different visceral effect versus if we just went without knowing who he was or tried to create who he was to a certain extent.
Right. Because in that scene, it was a house party that Letty was having, sort of like a housewarming party, and Emmett and Diana, uh, they were friends. There was a group of friends, and they were playing with a Ouija board up in the attic. And I think it was, I
Yeah.
think it was Emmett's turn, and he asked, "Am I going to have a good time on my summer vacation?" And the Ouija board told him no. And I'm telling you, every time I see that scene, I just get chills down my back because it was just like he had no
Yeah.
idea. I mean, like just to, and but I mean, with this episode, what was so fascinating to me was number one, the choice of music that was used, right? It was Cruel Summer. Because I was like, wait a minute, what am I? Is this Lovecraft Country? I was like, I thought maybe my computer had skipped. But then I always remember that Lovecraft Country, one of the things that I love about the show is that they use like modern music in this period piece. And I felt like it was appropriate. I felt like, I mean, some people may have different opinions, but just that opening scene with that funeral and just seeing all the people that were outside online to view the body, because it happened he was murdered August 28th, I believe. Yeah, August
Yeah.
28th. And then to just see, like, I think there was a woman who walked outside. I think she had just viewed the body and like she threw up, like she vomited.
Yes.
And it was just sort of like, wow. Okay. So I was like, okay, so we're about to get into some stuff here. But I did want to talk to you about, because every episode that I love about every episode of Lovecraft Country kind of centers a certain character on the show. And so this is what you would call, I guess, a D-centric episode or a Diana-centric episode. Um, And I think the thing that just chilled me, besides the supernatural aspects of this episode, it was really watching it and just kind of seeing this young black girl who's suffered so much. She's already lost her father. Her mother, Hippolyta, we understand it's been a week. When and then we that's when she's
Mhm.
going to the funeral alone, and so it's Tick, it's Letty, it's Ruby. It's kind of like this community, kind of coming together to try to to take care of her while Hippolyta is disappeared. But the thing that just really made me so, I guess, disturbed, or just was so triggering about watching this episode, was seeing how it felt like she was so naked in the world, like without her mother,
Mm.
having the covering of her mother and the covering of her father. And I just thought about like so many young black girls um today, back then, that didn't have that covering. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of crafting that story as far as Diana's journey in that episode?
It's really interesting because a very early version of the episode, Hippolyta was there. Um, and it was kind of, she was still on her own journey, Diana was, but she still had her mom. She still had, her community around her. And it wasn't until, episode 7, when Shannon, blurted out that, what if Hippo doesn't come back? And then that kind
Mm,
of like just re-shook, like it shook episode 8, and just we had to like, because Misha loved the idea of that.
right.
What if Hippolyta continues her journey of choosing herself and expanding herself, and what does that do to Dee in this world? um, so
Mm,
it kind of made her journey much more singular and really focused, because I think a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, most of the times when we think of race brutality and trauma is usually focused on adults. A lot of times we don't focus on what children experience. So this was our way to
mm,
kind of like change the lens and the perspective and move through a child's eyes during this time, and what do they experience, and how does it affect them, because that trauma will live within them, and they will become adults with that same trauma. So it starts when they're kids.
mm,
So it was very important for us to highlight and showcase how race affects our little ones.
mm-hmm. Because the thing that I found so interesting is, while those adults in her life were there, just in that opening scene, they were talking about Dee, but they didn't actually talk to her. I thought that was very interesting. Like it was sort of like this group where
Mm-hmm.
Ruby and Letty and Montrose and Tick, they were like, "Well, what about Diana? Should we tell?" But it's like, but you can see like the trauma and the sorrow coming off of Diana. But it was like, there was I didn't at least to me, there really wasn't any interaction with Diana, like, how are you feeling, are you okay? And throughout the episode, you kind of see that these very adults that are supposed to protect her are kind of going off in their own different directions, taking
Mm-hmm.
care of their problems. And then it's sort of like, okay, Diana's missing, but it's like, oh well. You know what I mean? I'm sure she'll show up. And it was so
Mm-hmm.
frustrating to see that. But I think that's one of the things that I love about Lovecraft is, while we love these characters, they're also very flawed. And a lot of them have their own
Yes.
blind spots, so to speak. You know what I mean? And it was just sort of like, okay, this girl is missing. And the scene that really shook me was when Diana decides to go off on her own, and then those cops show up. So she's in the alley, and then that's when the two cops
Mm.
sort of surround her, and they put that spell on her. I actually put that on pause, because I was so triggered by that scene, because I was like, where is everybody? Where are the
Mm.
adults to protect her? It was terrifying. That was such a terrifying scene.
Yes.
Um, yeah. But the other storyline that I want to talk to you about too, because we'll come back to Diana, is Ruby. Was one of my favorite characters on
Mm.
the show. Is this
Mine's
reintroduction
too.
of Ru yeah, of the interaction between Ruby and William. And I wanted to get your take on it, because I mean, different people have written, their take on of Ruby and William in different episodes. But for me, it's always like, we know that William is Christina, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I do feel that the interaction, at least when Christina is William, it feels like the interaction between William and Ruby is much, there's almost like a tenderness to it, like a sweetness to it, whereas
Mm.
the interaction between Ruby and
Mhm.
Christina can be very adversarial, even though they're the same person technically. And I just wanted to ask, as far as writing this episode, was that something that you were thinking about, or what's your take on that whole dynamic with Ruby with these two characters?
That's it. Really interesting that you say that, because it's true. William is definitely much more gentler with Ruby than Christina. Christina is like, just be a bad bitch and just do what you want
Yes.
to do,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
William is is much more softer and like gradually bringing her into this magical world. Um, I don't know. I think that's really interesting. I wonder, as I'm thinking about it, um, this idea of when you switch bodies, like you take on that person's essence to a certain extent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, that very well plays into it as well because their essence is still there. That's part of what's part of the the elixir is their
Mm-hmm.
essence. So I'm pretty sure that gentler side is William. And also too, I feel like Christina's very honest in everything that she says. So whatever she says,
Mm-hmm.
she's speaking the truth. It's not just games to her. Like she's very honest. So it would be interesting to see people's reaction of how Christina and Ruby's relationship blossoms from this episode on.
Right. So we need to talk about this sex scene. Between William and Ruby. I was like, when I talked to Ihoma, I have to ask, because I was just sitting there like, oh my God, I think Black Twitter is gonna explode on Sunday because I don't think they're ready for this. I was like, episode 5 with the shoe was already like, you know what I mean, mind bending. But that
Yeah,
sex scene, can you talk to us about kind of working on that scene, and were you on set when they shot it, or the discussions that you had with the performers for that love scene?
I was not on set that week when they shot that. I was on set the prior. I was on set mostly with Diana, um, but
Mm,
I would say what that scene is supposed to represent is Ruby completely embracing herself. Like she can't hide behind Hillary anymore. Um,
mm-hmm,
it's her being reborn. It's a rebirth of her, a transformation of her, on a deeper level than what we saw in 5. Um, and I think given the the gravitas of this episode with Emmett Till, you know, you want to hide, you want to run away, and she's being forced to face that to a certain extent. Um, that scene is crazy. I didn't know how they was going to
yes,
shoot it. Even when we came up with
right.
it, I was just like, because before we had already like laid down some groundwork, so we knew like we were going to have this transformation scene, but we had
Mm-hmm,
not come up with how the transformations actually look and work. So that came on
right.
the tail end. So when we decided on the gore of it, you know, the sex scene was already in place. So I was even when I was writing, I was like, how is this gonna look? Like, you know, like because I wrote it so like, soft and intimate and like just
Mm-hmm,
breaking of Ruby and like, because as she's transforming, she wants to stop having sex with William. But
mm-hmm.
he's like forcing her to face herself and to face her transformation. Um, so yeah, it's insane how it came
It
out.
is. It is. Because I realized, because I noticed that, because I remember the first time when they had sex in episode 4, they played I Put a Spell on You, right? So that was the Marilyn Manson version.
Mhm.
I think for this one, they play the same song, but it's a different version. I don't think it's the Nina Simone version. I'll have to look to see which one. But this one was definitely, this version of I Put a Spell on You was, it was softer. Like I it was hard to explain to my friend. I was like, because he
Mhm.
had screened the episode too, and I was like, there was like a grotesqueness, but it was also erotic, but it was also
Mm,
beautiful at the same time.
yeah.
Like I had never seen anything like that before, because it was just like, okay, there's a lot going on here, but it was it there's like an emotional truth, like you said, about Ruby really coming to face herself. And I'm wondering, I mean, this is just me. Um I'm wondering if part of her being unmade, right? And reverting back to Ruby,
Mhm.
could be because that she actually has feelings for William. Because I noticed that, because the other thing that I noticed too is that I was wondering if during this sex scene and this transformation going on from, Ruby going from a white woman turning back to Ruby, I was wondering if William was going to revert back to Christina, but she did it. So I thought that was very
Mhm.
interesting. Like the
Mhm.
power dynamics. Was there an intent with that, or when you were writing, um or making those decisions of who was going to turn and who wasn't?
I think it was mainly to focus on Ruby in her
Mhm.
transformation and her just coming to grips with herself and um, just the horror that she just witnessed with Emmett Till, because she actually saw the body. So it was just a shedding of herself, like
Mhm.
just this idea of when you witness something like that,
Right.
or you experience something like that, it's just this idea of like you just when it's just like it's not that you don't want to be black. It's just like I just want to rest. I just need to
Mhm.
rest from the horrors of being in this black skin. Like I just
Right.
need a reprieve. I just need to escape. Um, and this idea of William being like, no, you need to face yourself. You need to face all of it.
Mhm.
So the beauty of it is as women, when you find different parts of yourself that you try to hide or not try to face, and when it comes up and you face it, and it's not as bad as you thought it was, and you're stronger. You're stronger
Mhm.
for it. So, um, yeah. I hope
Yeah.
that
I
I
and
ramble a lot. So I hope that
No, that's okay. Oh
was
no, that's fine.
good.
Because what was interesting was like, because like you go from that scene with like, and that's sort of like that dynamic between William and Christina. Like you have like this love scene. I'm gonna call it a love scene. That's just for me.
Mhm.
And
It
then to
is.
go back,
Yeah.
the next scene where Ruby now is talking to Christina, right? And then the vibe is
Mhm.
totally different. You're like, okay, what just happened here? And then it was something that Ruby said that really stuck with me, where she said that the reason that she took the potion, to become Hillary, to become the white woman, is that she says, today of all days, I didn't want to be a black woman, fucking a white man. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
was like, damn. And I feel like there's certain unsaid truths, right? Certain things that maybe we feel like it's politically incorrect to talk about, because
Yeah.
it might be seen as rude. But I do feel like that conversation with them, while there's the supernatural aspects, there is this fundamental truth of being in an interracial relationship, particularly now. I mean, always, but I mean this
Mhm.
year specifically, with everything that's been going on. What is it like to be in an interracial relationship, whether it's a black man with a white woman, or in this specific case a black woman with a white man? What kind of conversations are you having? Like, I'm just curious. I mean, yes, I've dated, interracially in the past, but it's never been like a serious relationship enough to, like, we're married or we've been together 4 to 5 years. And it's like,
Mhm.
how do you navigate that? Like, how do you navigate those difficulties? Like, do you, or have you ever experienced being in an interracial relationship, or having friends who might be in interracial relationships with white men? Like, what kind of conversations have you had, or what have you um noticed, or just kind of observed when it comes to that?
I personally have not been in an interracial relationship. So I can't speak to that, but I
Mm-hmm.
do have friends who are and have been, and I've heard a variety of things. I've heard that they don't talk about it, which is very
Mm.
odd to me and strange that you can't that they don't
Wow.
talk about race.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had friends who've had drag out arguments with their significant other where
Mm-hmm.
they deny race, and so they argue back and forth about the institutions of race. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's both ends are very interesting. I yeah, I just think both ends are very interesting. And I think when you are in an interracial relationship, I think race is a very important topic that needs to be discussed. Um, yeah, it's just very it's I don't know, it's very interesting because Christina says to Ruby that she doesn't think that she cares about Emmett Till either. And that
Mm.
to me always very much um always very much struck me because a lot of time, you know, I don't know, I don't want to just put a blanket over how people feel or think, but I think
Right.
sometimes when you experience this thing so much, you become numb to it. So
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you care, but on a micro level, you may just be so disconnected from it because that's the only way you can protect yourself and your psyche. Um, and I know for me, even like this year, like I had to like, just detach myself from everything. And there was a level of numbness where things that were happening were not affecting me as they did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's just my way to protect myself because if I, you know, paid it like if I really watch the videos and watch the headlines, I will go crazy. I would go crazy. So um yeah, I don't know how someone could be in an interracial relationship and not discuss race, or how someone could be in a relationship and argue about race.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one of those things to me works. So
Right. And because that exchange, because I was sitting there thinking, okay, well, Ruby's got the upper hand, right? Because she's like, I want you to, to feel like what I'm feeling. I'm feeling the shame and, all of this. Like, I should be with my people mourning, with this innocent black boy being murdered. And then Christina just shoots back. She was like, well, it kind of like what you said, where you don't care about him either because and Christina was right because if Ruby was feeling
yeah.
all of these things that she was saying, why did you go back to William's house after the funeral? She could have
Mhm.
easily
Mhm.
stayed with Letty. She could have stayed because I remember she was taking care of Dee. She could have stayed at Dee's apartment, but no, you
Mhm.
chose to come back to the other side of town
Yes.
where you're protected by whiteness and privilege. So it's like, how bad do you really feel? I think on certain levels, I think Ruby does feel bad, but I think now, to me, like some of the because of the magic now that she has access to that white privilege, while she may not want to be white, which she says later on in a conversation with Letty, it's really about having those spaces, you know what I mean, and
Mhm.
not having to experience that pain. And yeah, that was just really fascinating to me. So we need to talk about these Jigabobo monsters that showed up. Cause girl, I could not sleep. I've been sleeping with like my door locked, my window closed, because that is some of the scariest ish that I've ever seen. Because I know when you watch like if you watch like Korean horror or
Mm.
Japanese horror like Ringu, like there's specific cultural monsters, right? That monsters that are specific to their culture, and those Jigabobos were very like if you're talking about black horror, like I was like, yup, right there, right? Because that
Mhm.
is sort of like about minstrelsy, right? And it was sort of like it was kind of taking it and just turning it on its head and just
Yeah.
making it monstrous. Like what was like when you were writing that episode, like how did you imagine them in your head?
I because in the book he's the it's just a doll. There's no like it wasn't like
Oh,
Topsy or anything like that. It was just a doll.
okay. Uh-huh.
So and I knew when I was crafting the episode, I was like I want it to be like a pickaninny. That's what I wanted. I wanted something like that.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
one of the other writers, he suggested, Topsy from Uncle Tom's Cabin. And when I saw the picture, I was like, yes, that's what I want. That's the vision that I see. And then the minstrel was just to add on to just the Jim Crow of it all, the and how it's just they see it as a game, like this is a game, and we're gonna do this dance and just follow you. It was just very creepy,
Mhm.
and I just wanted it to, because what Topsy and Bopsy really represent is how society breaks down Black little girls and creates
Mhm.
Black little girls with the idea of silencing them and making them hypersexual and gaslighting them. Like Diana's being gaslit the entire episode. No one else can see these monsters but her. And so you think like you're crazy. And then you become angry because you know you're not crazy. And then now you're the angry Black woman. You know what I mean? So
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
like it's like Topsy and Bopsy like represented what society does. It's like they're doing what they're designed to do. Like that's something that I wrote, throughout the script with Topsy, like doing what they were designed to do.
Mhm.
And that's what they're designed to do to us.
Right. Yeah, that was terrifying. And then that song, because I was watching the episode and it was the song and it kept saying, let me in, stop that knocking on the door. And I was like, wait a minute, is this an actual song? And then I looked it up and it's actually a minstrel song. I think it was like, what was that
Mm,
from 1850s, the 1840s? And I was like, OMG. Okay, it's all coming together now. Okay. I see what they're doing with this episode. I was like, okay.
bananas.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so something else that was really interesting was the storyline with Atticus and his father Montrose. We know that they've had
Mm,
a very contentious relationship, and particularly with episode 7 where Atticus finds out that Montrose is gay or queer,
oof.
and they're yeah, and they finally are able to have a conversation in this episode, uh, where Tick is able to ask about his marriage to his mother. I had always
Mhm.
suspected that the mother knew. I didn't feel like this was some down low closeted relationship. I had a feel like I had a feeling that the mother knew. I feel because this is something, and I think this is what's interesting about the storyline is that it's sort of like this idea that women only agree to marry heterosexual men, right? But we are seeing that women marry all types of men, right? Like
Mhm.
just right now, the whole thing that's happening with Andrew Gillum, right? He did an interview with Tamron Hall, and the wife said that she knew that Andrew Gillum was bisexual. She was like, when we were dating, he had told me that already, and that's our business. That's you know what I mean. And I was like, and it just made me think of how many Black women, like throughout the years or throughout the decades, would agree to marry a man who may not be heterosexual. You know what I mean? Where it's
Mhm.
just like
Mhm.
we want to raise a family, because I think Macho says something about he chose family over an asylum, because we also find out
Yeah.
the things that happen to gay people back then, like lobotomies. I was like, wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
that bad. It was that bad. Wow. Okay. Yeah. But I especially loved the Easter egg that we saw in episode 7, because when at the end when we saw Atticus come back from the time portal, we saw him with an actual copy of the book of Lovecraft Country. So I was
Mhm.
just sort of like, so in my head, I'm like, so is this going to be like the actual Lovecraft Country written by Matt Ruff? But then we get this really cool twist where this version of Lovecraft Country is actually written by Atticus's son, George Freeman,
Mhm.
which was interesting. So what was your reaction when you found that out, when you were given that information?
I'm trying to think because we built everything together,
Hmm.
and this was two years ago. So you guys
Right,
have me digging into the archives of my memory of the
right.
writers' room.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think what I loved about it was the twist of it, of how, because we changed things in Matt Russ's book. Like, we
Mhm.
made Christina, who was actually Caleb, Horace. We changed him to Diana. So there was characters that we switched around. So
Mhm.
what I loved about this George Freeman book being written, it's like we reverted back to Matt's version of Diana is a boy named Horace and Christina
Mm.
is a guy. Like, I love how we went back to the original way it was in the book, but
Mhm.
it seems like an alternate, reality universe. So that was like the thing I loved about it. I thought that was just so cool and so genius for us
Right.
writers to come up with.
Yeah, because I was telling my friend, because I was like, the great thing about Lovecraft Country is that because of the story, and now that you've added the element of time travel, I was like, this show, like if it goes into like season 3, 4, 5, it doesn't necessarily have to stay in 1955. This could be a generational show, where you could show
Mhm.
the children and the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, right? Which is pretty
Yeah.
cool. Um, and then so this scene with Christina. So we know that Christina and Ruby had this argument, so to speak, where Ruby was basically imploring Christina to have empathy. Like, I need you to feel what I'm feeling. And towards the end of the episode, we see Christina at the dock with these two strange men, and they
Mhm.
start wailing on her and just beating the crap out of her. And at first I was like, okay, what's going on here? And then that's when we see that she has paid these men to actually reenact the horror that happened to Emmett Till, right down to the barbed wire throwing her, into the water. Um, and I was like, it felt like time just stopped, and I'm like, did I just see what I think I saw? Oh my god! Oh my god! Wow. And so, what was the conversation? So when you were writing that scene? Was there like, I don't know if we can go there, guys. Can we go here? Can we go there? Because I've had Shannon Houston. She was a guest on the show last week, and I remember her saying, when I interviewed her
Mhm.
back in 2018, she was like, one of the things that she loved about writing, being in the writers' room of Lovecraft Country, is that she was like, we're gonna be crossing a lot of lines, and we're going to be making people a lot. It won't just
Yeah.
be white people we're going to make mad, we're going to be making black people mad.
Mhm.
So when you found out about that scene, was there a part of you that was like, well, I don't know if we can go there, or how can we go there?
Listen,
Mm-hmm.
I was a lot of things made me uncomfortable. A lot of things made me
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable, and I was kind of like Misha's gauge on where to go. Like, if I was uncomfortable, she was like, "Oh yeah, let's do it."
Right.
And so I was
Oh,
like
wow.
very, very, even when I was writing the scene. Yeah, it was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff that she was saying. I'd be like, "We can't. I can't. I won't write what?" And
Mm-hmm.
so writing that scene, it was very. I remember Misha gave me the choice. She was like, you can have Christina react in any kind of way. She can be angry, she can be stoic, she could cry, whatever you want to choose. And I was like, okay, cool. And of course, I chose her crying, because it's like, I feel as though sometimes, white people will dismiss what black people say or their experience. But
Mm-hmm.
when you experience something yourself viscerally, it's kind of hard to deny it. It's kind of hard to say, oh, it's whatever, So
Mm-hmm.
having us to, and the thing about it is, we wanted to, how can we show what happened to Emmett without it being on a black body, you know?
Ah, okay.
And so to show it on a white woman, and that it was a white woman who caused all of this to begin with, uh,
Mm-hmm.
it was a way for us to just to show the brutality of it,
Mm-hmm.
but without the psychological trauma a black person would have experienced had we watched it on a black body.
Right. Right. And and the thing that I thought, there were a couple of things that I was thinking about that scene. One, something that I was thinking about was how, what you were saying about how there we aren't believed, right? That when these things happen to us, that white people tend to be like, oh, it's too awful, nobody could ever do that. But then I think about, like Mike Brown and, other Black people who've been brutalized by the police, like Sandra Bland, that even when we have the footage and we put
Mhm.
it on social media and white people, they consume it, right? So then it's sort of like a consumption of Black trauma, but then it's like they're horrified, but then the next day it's like business as usual. So then my
Yeah.
question when I was watching that scene, I was like, okay, so now Christina has consumed that, right? In a way, she's consumed that Black trauma and pain that Emmett has experienced. The question is her character, this is a rhetorical question, but the question is that going to change her fundamentally as a white woman? Like, is that going to make her outraged to enact change? Is she going to join a civil rights organization? And my personal opinion is that no, she's not, because ultimately here's the thing, and I think this is what made the scene so brilliant. She's still a white woman who is invulnerable, right? Because all of that happened
Mhm.
to her. She experienced exactly what Emmett Till did. The difference is Emmett didn't come back. She came back, right? And so she was able to pull
Yeah.
herself out of the water. So
Yeah.
there's still that white woman privilege, also compounded by
Mhm.
that power that she has of invulnerability. So it's like, I don't know how much she's gonna change. It'll be like, yeah, it was cool. It was kind of like somebody said. They said it's sort of
Um,
like an amusement park of Black trauma, where white people buy tickets, movies or whatever. They consume it. They're like, oh my god, it's awful, and they just walk away. And it's like, oh, okay, you know.
yeah, everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Because we, like you said, we're seeing the the brutality being recorded. And it's not just like, you know, we've seen Rodney King and what
Mm-hmm.
that did. We've seen the shooting of, Philando Castro, like Castillo. Like we're seeing these people, we're seeing it, and there still is no change. So I don't know. I think if history is any indication,
Mm-hmm.
um, Christina will probably stay the same.
Yeah, she's such a fascinating character to me because I hate her, but I also kind of admire her at the same time, because she's like so audacious enough where she's like, I'm gonna stand up to this society that told me that I could not enter their ranks by the very virtue of me being born a woman, right? And so in a way, she's just kind of like found these ways to circumvent her limitations. But at the same time, it's like she's very, like, she has her Karen way. She has a lot of Karen moments on this show, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. But then also the conversation that she has when she meets um Letty in church, because they're trying to make a deal where Letty is like, okay, I'll give you the negatives of, the pages of the book in exchange for you to make Atticus invulnerable. And in an interesting turn of events, she makes Letty invulnerable. Christina makes Letty invulnerable instead of Atticus. Why do you think that is? What in your mind when you wrote that scene? Why do you think Christina's motivations were for that?
I think it's just this idea of stop centering everything on the men.
Mm-hmm.
Stop
Ah.
choosing the men.
Mhm.
Choose yourself, because I think a lot of times, especially as Black women, um given the climate and the history of this country, we feel the need to protect and coddle our Black men, even at the detriment of ourselves, just because of what we have witnessed. This is all residue from slavery,
Mhm.
witnessing our strong Black men being brutalized and killed, um in the hopes to strike fear among the rest of the slaves. So it's just like this idea of Black women always having the need to protect our our men. Like the fact that Letty didn't even think to protect herself, and she's pregnant. She
Mm.
still chose the man to protect.
Mhm.
So I feel like, and Christina said that to her in episode 4, like, men are stop making men the center of the universe. Like, they're not. And I think with Christina giving her that option of choosing herself is is giving. I feel like Christina is like about women empowerment to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, cause just because of what she's been like sidelined from her rightful heir to the throne, so to speak, just because she's a woman. So
Mm-hmm.
she's like a white feminist almost, and
Yeah.
having Letty choose herself and she doesn't know, that she's pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
but to choose herself and not to choose the man, which I thought is just brilliant, because I mean, I myself have in
Mm-hmm.
the past chosen men or centered myself around men. Um, and that's not empowering at all.
Yeah. Yeah, because that ties into episode 7, when Hippolyta's having that conversation with Josephine Baker, and she's just sort of like,
Mm,
I let society just tell me who I was, I just being like this very polite Negro woman. And then even the scene where she finally confronts George, where she was just like, I love you, but I made myself small for you, and you let it happen. Because that was the conversation that I saw
mm,
last week when the episode, and I'm sure that that will continue this week too, is this idea of how, someone had tweeted this, I forgot what her name was, but she was like, it's very interesting that when men meet us as Black women, like they love this fire and passion inside of us, but then once they are in a relationship with us or they marry us, then all of a sudden it's like they're just trying to, put out the
woo,
fire. Where it's just like, no, you're too loud, you're
woo,
too ambitious, you're too, whatever. But I do love that at the
too
end of the
strong.
episode.
I've heard
Too
that one.
strong, too strong. Oh, I've heard that a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. Mhm.
And I do love at the end of the episode that
Yes.
we finally see Diana stand up for herself, and she just busts into the cop's office, and I was just like, oh damn, girl, this is not gonna end well for you. But she was just like, she spits on him, and she was like, "F you, pig," and I was like, wow, okay, this is.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. I just love that she was just reclaiming. And she was just like, well, you know what? If those things are coming for me, so be it. You know what I mean? Of course, I did think about the fact that.
Because
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, just to piggyback off of what you're saying, I
Hmm.
think with Diana, to a certain extent, she represents the youth organizers, or the strength the strength and the energy comes from the youth. Like, just with the
Hmm.
recent like protests, like those were all young kids who were
Hmm.
um fighting and protesting. It's the same thing with the civil rights movement. A lot of that was children. A lot of children got arrested, and put into, paddy wagons and taken to jail because they were out protesting instead of going to school back in the civil rights movement. So it's just the idea of like, sometimes it's not the adults who start the change, but it's the kids, it's the children who are fiery and passionate and demand change.
Hmm.
But I love that scene. I love him. I love her calling him a pig. I love all of that.
Me too. Yeah, and
Yes.
then when when she storms out of his office, that speech that we hear, I was like, wait a minute, who is that? And I'm a nerd, and
Mm,
so I googled it and I realized that it was Naomi Wadler. She was an
yeah.
11-year-old girl who spoke at the March of Our Lives rally, and just gave this really beautiful impassioned speech about how Black girls, how our lives are not respected, and how, sometimes we don't make the 11 o'clock news, we're not on the front page when things happen to us, so yeah, and so that final scene, uh when Atticus goes to try to save Letty because he knows that the cops are going to the house to try to find that Ori. And
Mhm.
yeah, so then the cops are ready to shoot him. So we're ready. It looks like almost like a reenactment of things that we see every day. And then that's
Yeah.
when, oh my God, that protection spell that we thought didn't work actually works. And so now I call them beasties. So we realized that it did work. And now Atticus has his own beast. similar
Yes.
to the ones we saw in episode 1 and 2. And I noticed that his beast is black. I found that very
Mm,
fascinating. It was in a, I mean, it's a terrifying looking monster, but the blackness actually gave it a kind of weird beauty in a way, like because the other ones look more
yeah.
like, pale and albino type, but his was dark. It was black. And I'm wondering, I had a friend who was kind of theorizing, is it perhaps maybe the spirits of his ancestors? I'm like, I don't know, I didn't read the book, but it is interesting that the beast is a different color than the one that Christina and the Braithwaites had before, which is interesting. And so, yeah, so now we have Letty, who has the power of invulnerability. We have
Mhm,
Atticus, who has this beastie, right? But then the question
mhm.
is, what does Ruby have?
Ruby.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she still has her elixir. I think Ruby is just focused on learning magic so she can do what she wants to do,
Mm-hmm.
and taking magic and having it for her own sake and her own free will to do whatever the fuck she wants to do. Um So I don't know. I feel like hers is she has the transformation. She's able to transform into this white woman and move through the world. Um, but it would be interesting to see, because eight was kind of like where all the secrets finally came out. Like for the
Mm-hmm.
last 7 episodes, everybody had their own secrets. Montrose had his secrets. You know, I just feel like eight is where everybody is exposed. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
it's great to see. It's great to see because for most of the time, Ruby has been on the out of everything. She didn't know
Mm-hmm.
anything, and now she's the one with the most information. She knows everything about what Christina told her. She knows everything that Letty told her. So, Ruby, you know, if anything, that would be her secret power is that she has all the information from both sides.
Mm. And yeah, and just kind of seeing what she's gonna do with that. I mean, I'm kind of like, I'll be honest with you, I kind of want to see Ruby fuck some shit up. Like, I kind of want to see her do some magic. Like, what would that look like beyond just using the elixir? But like, if Christina shows her the arts of magic, like she promised, like that would be a really interesting story arc. Because something that I noticed in episode 5, and then I saw that it was kind of reinforced in this episode, was, Letty being drawn, deeper and deeper into this conspiracy and magic. She's sort of veering more towards like religious salvation. Like when you see her in the church and she's praying, she openly admitted she wasn't much for that when she was younger,
Mhm.
but now we see her leaning into that. That's her way of coping. And then Ruby, on the other hand, is sort of like getting her power from the supernatural. So I find it interesting that these two sisters are finding like these different
Mhm.
paths in order to deal with this new world that they've become a part of. So yeah, I kind of want to see Magic Ruby. I would love to see that. That would be cool.
I
So
love Ruby. Ruby's like my favorite. She's like one of my favorite characters. I love her so much. She's so
yeah,
great.
yeah, and the actress Wimi Masako is she's just amazing. She's just amazing. I love her.
Mhm,
I forget
mhm.
that she's British sometimes. It's like she is. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. Because her accent is great. Some British
Yes.
actors, sometimes the accent will slip, but she is very committed to that character. And at least to my
Mhm.
knowledge, I have not seen her slip in all 8 episodes. So, all right. Well, Ioma, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Will you
Course.
be live tweeting? Will you be live tweeting when the episode
I
airs on
will be
Sunday?
like, yep, I will be there. I don't know if I will be there after the episode is done because I don't want to read the tweet. So, but I will be live tweeting at least for the 9 p.m. showing, and then I think I'm gonna exit out
Oh,
and
great. Great.
recover probably.
All righty. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Spectrum Lounge. See you on the other side.